I like that. Come teach our church how to do. Very happy to be here. My name is Daniel Bruneau. This is my home church. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the visitor now, although I grew up in this church. I'm very happy to be here, and my wife and I live in the United States. The quick bio is I currently actually work as a consultant for the Adventist Review. So Adventist World Magazine, Adventist Review, it's all part of the same ministry at the General Conference. And it's been a fun and exciting 18 months of working for the church, having come from corporate. And I'm learning a lot about how the sausage is made. And some of you know, that can be both an enlightening aspect, positively, as well as challenging as well. But no matter what happens, some of you may be aware of all the discussions happening now for annual council. I just came back from there recently. This is God's church, and it will stand firm no matter what. So I'm happy to be here. My wife and here actually be working from here for the next couple of months. So you're going to be stuck with me for the next 2 months. And we're beginning a series on end time events for November. I'll be preaching this Sabbath. I'll be preaching a couple Sabbaths. Pastor Jerry will preach next week. I believe he's doing the 7 trumpets. And he'll come back after the 17th and preach another sermon. I believe Ashley we're doing the, is it heaven you're doing, or is it, yes, heaven and new earth? So it's going to be an exciting month, right? And it's such an applicable subject for this time, the times that we're facing right now. So without any further ado, because we have a lot to get through, I just wanted to say hello. You're going to hear a lot more from me. I'm actually going to tell you a little bit about the Adventist Review Ministries while I'm here over time, and maybe have you be involved in a few things. Before we do that, let's have a word of prayer before we get involved in this sermon. Father, what an honor and pleasure it is to be here together this morning, to praise your name, to worship, to sing, Lord, to read scripture full of glee and delight. Father, I pray right now that as we dive into your word, as we unpack what is written in your word, that you may enlighten our hearts and minds. And Lord, I pray above all else, let me be your instrument, Lord. Should I say anything in error, Lord, guide me on the right path. Be my words, my behavior, my action, Lord. Work through me this morning. This is not about anything that I say, Lord, but it's about what you can say through me. Father, thank you for these people here today, for your children, Lord. And as we gather together, whatever burden may be on our heart, let us lay it at your feet right now so that we can be engrossed in what you have to say to us. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. So this week's sermon, and sorry I don't have a lot of the Bible text on the screen. I promise you by the next sermon I'll have it on there. But if you have your Bibles at hand, I would like you to have that as well, because we're going to leaf through it and go back and forth a few times. This week's sermon is about signs of the times. Signs of the times. And I want to begin with a little quote here. The late Stephen Hawking, who actually died, I think it was March of this year, gave a presentation in 1997. Some of you may know it now. It's quite a famous lecture. And the lecture was titled, Is Man Determined or Free? And this is what he had. He had a very thought-provoking statement in the lecture that he said. I'm going to read it to you. And I quote from his lecture. I fear that since the evolutionary progress has worked through the dialectic of determinism and aggression, our long-time survival and any hope for our species is in question. However, if, is a key word, we can keep from destroying each other for the next 100 years, sufficient technology would have been developed to distribute humanity to various planets, and then no one tragedy or trustee would eradicate us all at the same time. 1997. Do you think that was an off-the-cuff remark? He made the same remark in 2007. And last year, in 2017, 1 year before his death, he made this remark, a little bit more bleak this time. He said, there is no new world, no utopia around the corner. We are running out of space, and the only places to go are other worlds. Now, when you heard that in 1997, we would probably laugh a bit more. Nowadays, when people see what's happening and we see the advanced technology, people are a lot more receptive to that. We could actually go to another world. Elon Musk, for example. Who's heard of Elon Musk? He owns Tesla. He created Tesla. SpaceX. He's doing the Hyperloop. You name it. If anyone has heard of the Iron Man, he is the modern-day equivalent of Tony Stark in that respect. This is Elon Musk. This is what he said. Multi-billionaire, influential in every sphere of science. He says this. One path for our future is that we stay on Earth forever. But here's what he says. But if we do, we're all going to die. The alternative is to become a space-faring civilization, a multi-planetary species. We have to leave this Earth, in other words. We have to leave. And if you don't think that's current enough, that was actually given at the speech last year. This is a November magazine of somebody called Wired. This is a very influential technology magazine. publication. It's digital as well as in print, and it's related to the contemporary culture as well that we have in here. And this is featuring a man, November 2019, called Jeff Bezos. Anyone heard of Jeff Bezos? He is the wealthiest man in the world now. He is the owner, the founder of Amazon. He has a company called Blue Horizon, where he's also trying to get off the planet. The tagline here is, Jeff Bezos wants us to leave Earth for good. People want off this planet. Who wants to go to Mars? Anybody? No takers of Mars? We'll come back to that question later. But here's my point. If arguably humanity's brightest minds, who do not believe in a creator God, by the way, all of these people are atheists, if they're recognizing the fragility of human existence, and they're not recognizing it in terms of tens of thousands of years, right? Stephen Hawking said, in the next 100 years, or we're going to destroy each other. They're measuring it in multiple decades. Where do people then, if they're beginning to sense this, that we have to leave, there's a sense of uncertainty in if you ever attached to any news and media. We're going to talk about that later. Where do people turn for something that's certain in a world that is utterly uncertain right now? For such a time as this, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has a message, God's message, of judgment today, of discerning true light from darkness, so that we can have a character fit for the kingdom of heaven. And that message could not be timelier and more urgent as we look forward to Jesus' soon return. The Bible couldn't be more clear on this fact. Let's just go through a few texts. Revelation chapter 1, verse 3. Remember I said the word Jesus' soon return. Revelation chapter 1, verse 3. I'm going to read it for you. Revelation chapter 1, verse 3. It says, Blessed is he who reads, and those who hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written in it, for the time is near. And if you read a little bit further in Revelation chapter 7, verse 1, the time is near is referring to none other than the second return of Jesus Christ himself. The time is near, the Bible says. The book of Revelation, actually, it's bookended with the promise of the return of Jesus, but also with an urgency to his return. Revelation 22, verse 7 says, Behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is he who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. Revelation 22, verse 12 says, And behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me, to give to everyone according to his word. Verse 20 of Revelation 20 says, He who testifies these things, surely I am coming. Can you guess what the next word is? Quickly. The repeated and closing promises of Revelation is that Jesus is coming quickly, quickly, quickly. But we know what the scoffers say. Maybe even you and I say that. This is written some 2,000 years ago. It says quickly. Where is Jesus? Why hasn't he returned? 2 Peter 3, verse 3. Knowing this verse, we all know this text, that scoffers will come in the last day, walking according to their own lusts, and saying, Where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continued as they were from the beginning of creation. How do we understand quickly in this context? We're going to unravel that throughout the sermon. Notice what Jesus says, though, about his own coming. And this is why I want you to turn to Matthew 24. We are going to dive into Matthew 24 this morning. Matthew chapter 24. And I want you to keep that chapter of the Bible open. We're going to go back and forth from various texts, but Matthew 24 is going to be our anchor that we're going to come back to. But notice what Jesus says within the context of him coming back. Matthew chapter 24, and let's go to verse 42. Matthew 24, verses 42. And he says this. Jesus says this. Watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched and not allowed his house to be broken into. Therefore you also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. So here's the key that I want us to remember. Christ's return is a certainty. The Bible says so. It's just not a certain time, but it's a certain that he's going to return. We don't know the day, the hour. And it's in this context that Christ says watch. He doesn't say calculate. He says watch. The verb is always watch. So here's the question. What exactly should we be watching for? Let's go through Matthew 24 and find out. Matthew 24, verse 4. What is it that we should be watching for in these last days? What are the signs of the times? Matthew chapter 24, verse 4. It says this, "And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many." Now, we're going to come back to that in a minute, because I want to expand on that. That's an important text. But let's keep reading. And what does it say next in verse 6? "And you will hear wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled. All these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." You know, if you ever heard a sermon on the signs of the times, what happens typically in that sermon? You give a sign of the times and what Jesus said, and you give something that's relevant from today's context, right? And then you hear all of that, and then out the door we go, and we feel energized to make a change in our lives. Is that what happens sometimes? Yes, I mean, it's good, we need to do that. Sometimes, though, we need to delve a little bit deeper. But this morning, I do want to bring some relevant points in play. I do want us to see the relevancy of these things, right? Because sometimes we need to be reminded. There's wars and rumors of wars. Yes, wars have been going on for many, many millennia, centuries, right? The 20th century, many of you know this, was the bloodiest in history in terms of wars. Here's another question. Are we involved in wars right now? Yeah, maybe, potentially conflicts. You know the United States? Is the United States, since it's the leader in terms of the West, in terms of where it goes forward, and I have the most information there, since I live there now, is the United States at war? Yeah. It's involved in 7 major wars right now. The White House just put out a document earlier this year to admit that. It hadn't officially said that, but now it officially says it's involved in 7 major wars. 7 major wars. We don't hear about it. It's different kinds of war, and especially in America, the news gets trumped by Trump, right? It's all about Trump. But it's wars and rumors of wars are actually it's happening. And here's an interesting article. It was actually ran in The Guardian early this year, and it asks this question: "Why is the world at war?" And I quote from the article from The Guardian, Sunday the 4th of March 2018, saying, "The globe is scarred by violence. We live in a world of trouble." But here's a key that they mention. They begin the human side to it. "We remain deeply anxious. We can blame terrorism and the fear it inspires, or the contemporary media and the breathless cycle of breaking news, but the truth remains that the wars that seem to inspire the fanatics all have produced so many headlines in recent years, they prompt deep anxiety." Why do these wars prompt deep anxiety? The article answers these questions by saying, "These wars appear to have no end in sight." That's the difference. It just keeps going on and on, conflict after conflict. Remember, don't be troubled. This isn't the sign. The end is not yet. That's what the Bible says. Let's keep reading in Matthew chapter 24. We don't have limited time today. The end is not in sight. Matthew 24, verses 6 and 7. "All these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet," even though it may feel that. And in verse 7 says, and we just talked about this, "For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places." All those things we can relate to. I don't need to go into details about what's happening right now, but I do want to mention one thing on the question of famine. The BBC had an article that came out just last year, and it said, "Why is there still famine?" Some of you may have seen a young 7-year-old girl from Yemen. I don't know if any of you have seen that harrowing picture this past week. It's a very sad picture. It's very heart-wrenching. She actually passed away this week. She died, and she's been representing this mass starvation. Millions upon millions of people in Yemen are starving right now, this famine. And do you know what the major cause of famine is today? Anybody have any ideas? Conflict. The UN actually says here, the main cause of famine is conflict. Can you begin to see how Matthew 24 now, the sequence, the way we're going into the verses, how they begin to get tied together? The wars that are occurring, what's happening. Then Christ says in sequence, there's also going to be famine. Why is there famine? Because of what's happening, because of the conflict in mankind. Let's keep going. Verse 8 says, Matthew 24, verse 8, "All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake, and then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another." We already have a betrayal of people in the cause of religion by itself. We just think of the shooting in the synagogue just last week. But did you know, for example, when we talk about Christian persecution, this is the quote from Christianity Today. I wonder if people, have you ever thought about, is persecution happening to Christians today? This is interesting. I didn't know this fact. This is reported in January 2017. For the third year in a row, I quote, the modern persecution of Christians worldwide has hit another record high. Sometimes we have to hear the relevancy. Sometimes we have to hear what's happening right now to be reminded of what Jesus foretold a couple of millennia ago. Let's keep reading. Limited time today. And then it says, verse 11, then many false prophets will rise and deceive many. That's interesting here. Many false prophets will rise and will deceive many. This is the second time here now that Jesus has used the words deception, deceive. And I want to pause here just a moment because this is critical for our understanding of Matthew 24 and as we go through the different signs of the times. Let's just go back. Where did Jesus use that term deception to begin with? It was Matthew chapter 24. If you go back a few verses to verse 4. What does it say there? The very first thing that Jesus says there, take heed that no one deceives you. This is important in the sequence of the verses. He doesn't begin with wars, rumors of wars. He doesn't say, take heed that no one persecutes you, although we know we will be persecuted. The Bible says so. There's a guarantee of that. He says, take heed that no one deceives you. Jesus' highest concern is to watch that no one deceives you. Why? Because in that deception, if you are deceived, everything else falls apart. I want us to explore what deception is just a little bit and how Satan can be cunning and deceiving in the way he operates amongst humanity. Turn with me quickly to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. Let's explore this notion, this reality of deception and the way that Satan can deceive us. Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8. And we're actually going to go to verse 30. Now, let me give you the context of Matthew chapter 8. In this little bit that we're reading here. This is the context of this piece here, is where Jesus comes onto the shore and the demoniacs rush at him. And he actually casts the demons out and he actually heals the demoniacs. And so we're going to pick up the story in Matthew 8 verse 30. And you're going to see kind of what is the response of Satan. Do you remember what he did? He wanted to rush into the pigs, right? Let's pick it up. Matthew chapter 8 verse 30. So just remember. So, and Jesus reaches the shore, demoniacs rush at him, he heals them, and the demons speak to Jesus, and then this is what happens in verse 30. Matthew 8 verse 30. Now a good way off from them, there was a herd of many swine feeding. By the way, in Mark chapter 5, it actually explains that it's about 2,000 pigs. 2,000 swine are there. That's a lot of pigs, right? It's a good note to know. Verse 31. So the demons begged him, saying, if you cast us out, permit to go away into the herd of swine. Now, what I want us to notice here, something very interesting here. They asked Jesus to go into the herd of swine. Has anybody thought about that before? They asked him to go into that. Why did they ask? Is it because the pigs were filthy and they were just so scared that they wanted to go in there? What was that? They need a host. Okay. Was it because they need a host? Yeah. What about, it's all good points, absolutely right. But Satan is cunning. He's always one step ahead. This is a strategic move. This is strategy at its best. He is asking Jesus if I can go into those pigs. The demons are asking that because he wants to do something very specific. What happens? Verse 32. And he said to them, go. This is Jesus saying to the demons, go. So when they come out, they went into the herd of swine, and suddenly the whole herd, think about it, 2,000 of swine ran violently down a steep place into the sea, and they perished in the water. So the question becomes, why did Jesus grant the request? And why did Satan want to go into the pigs? And we know, I just said it, we typically answer that. Say, well, the demons, the pigs, it's a host, they were unclean, right? There was a reason. He was thinking 2 steps ahead. He wanted this to cause the commotion. That's how he deceives. That's how cunning he is. He's a deceiver. So what happens? In Matthew 28, he goes into the pigs. Matthew 8, verse 33, Matthew 8, verse 33, it gives us the answer. It says, then those who kept them, the pig herders, they fled, and they went away into the city, and they told everything, okay, including what had happened to the demon-possessed man. What do you think the pig herders' version of the story was? Jesus came and he healed, and it was amazing. You should have seen them. You know, they've been harassing us, these demon-possessed men. Now they're healed. Or do you think it was one where you should have seen those 2,000 pigs? They were crazy. We probably guessed the response because in verse 34, this is what happens to the city. This isn't the city of the capitalists, by the way. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus. All of them came out when these pig herders came back to talk to the city. And what did they do? And they saw him, and they begged him to depart from their region. Jesus, please leave. We're fearful. Desire of Ages, page 340 says, in causing the destruction of the swine, it was Satan's purpose to turn the people away from the Savior. Deception at its best. Satan had known he can't stand in front of Christ. When the demons met Christ, of course, he knew what was going to happen. And if you read the Bible a little bit earlier than that, you actually see the conversation he has. Is this the time of the end he talks about? They actually recognize it. Is it time now? You know, Satan is very knowledgeable about biblical texts, by the way, much more than we often are. He knew what was happening. And so when he was being cast out, the question was not necessarily, oh, let me go over there because, I'm doomed. I've been thwarted by Christ. He was thinking ahead, saying, okay, if I'm going to be cast out, what can I do to distract, to make sure that those people don't want to see Jesus anymore, that they can't see him for who he really is. And so I'm going to go into the pigs and make this cacophony and take them off the path. And that's exactly what he did. There is more to the story though, so if you listen to the end, we'll come back and finish the account. But what I want us to understand this morning is that this account of the healed demoniacs, it exposes how successful Satan can be in the deception of mankind. He was thinking 2 steps ahead all the time. Listen to what Ellen White says. For thousands of years, Satan has been experimenting upon the properties of the human mind, and he has learned to know it well. The great deceiver hopes so to confuse the minds of men and women that none but his, talking about Satan's, voice will be heard. Wow. That's found in letters at page 244. There is a reason that Jesus Christ in Matthew 24, if you go back there with me, begins in terms of ordering the signs in Matthew 24 verse 4, there's a reason that Jesus Christ begins, let nobody deceive you. Make sure no one deceives you. Because if you think about it, if you succumb to Satan's deception in verse 4 and 5 of Matthew 24, then the wars and the rumors of wars and all that you see crumbling around you on this earth is only going to cause anxiety, and it also becomes susceptible to those false ideas, to the teachings. And it's within this context then that then Jesus later on in verse 11 warns, then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And that's interesting when you read a little bit further than that, because we're obviously not just talking here about the David Koresh's. There are those ones that even speak of them being Christ themselves. But we're talking about the subtleties. The question is, are we able to discern truths from untruths? If you listen to a pastor on YouTube, maybe there's one that you really enjoy watching every week. Does your truth come from the pastor? And they may be wonderful pastors, they may be wonderful preachers. Or does your truth come from here? And the reason I say that is because even what you watch in media can be manipulated to a degree that you won't even recognize that it's the actual person saying something. There's something called deep fakes. Has anybody heard of deep fakes? Ashley has, and Sierra has. Do you know what deep fakes are? Deep fake is a terminology, and it's essentially, let me give you the best example, very, very quickly. They did this with President Obama. They took one of his videos, and now you can buy software that you can get off the shelf. It is not anything that takes manipulation at any degree. Anybody sitting here can buy the software. You can change the actual way the mouth speaks. You can use the same words that President Obama was using, and you can actually have him say something completely and utterly different, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Talk about fake news. That's why it's called deep fakes. This is at a level that is unprecedented. and that access to that technology, easy for anybody to get hold of. My point is that Satan has an arsenal available to him. And in these days where technology is increasing at a rate that we don't are aware of, there is a reason why deception is so critical when it comes first and foremost. But let's keep going. We just finished Matthew chapter 24, verse 11. Let's go to verse 12. Matthew 24, verse 12. And because lawlessness will bound, the love of many will grow cold. And for me, whenever I read this text, it perhaps isn't better described than when we read the words of 2 Timothy 3, verses 3 to 5. I don't know actually if you're able to get that on there, 2 Timothy 3, verses 3 to 5, because this is just telling of humanity in general. The love, in Matthew 24, verse 12, it says, and because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. And this is explained. What does that mean, the love of many will grow cold? Let's just see what 2 Timothy 3, verses 3 to 5 says. But know this, that in the last days, perilous times will come. And listen to this. Men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such people turn away. We've heard this one before, right? Yes. Isn't that an appropriate description of our society today? I don't have a better description. The Bible explains itself. Did you know that there are more slaves at any time right now than at any time in human history? More slaves right now. Every facet of the sinful human condition, it's rearing its head, and it's happening at an alarmingly increasing rate. And the world knows it. That's why you see articles that talk about people being anxious. There are people being interviewed, whether they're people, leaders of the country, government. There are people on the street saying we're anxious. We don't know what the future holds. One day the economy's up, the next day it's not so up. There's divisions happening at a level that is unprecedented. Regardless of what your opinion may be or may not be on Mr. Trump in the United States, division is being created at a level that is just, it's mind-boggling to see, and it's happening right before our eyes. This world is crumbling. That's why Jesus says in Matthew 24, verse 37, he says, as in the days of Noah. This is what was happening to humanity, mankind, in the days of Noah. As in the days of Noah. There's going to be an increasing intensity of the signs, and this was foretold by Jesus himself. And by the way, I just want to point something out. If you go to Matthew 24, verse 8, and it says there, with respect to this idea of increasing intensity, right? Sometimes we forget that part, but there is an increasing intensity. Go to Matthew 24, verse 8, and I'm going to read it in the New King James Version. It says, all these things are the beginning of sorrows. Does anybody here have an NIV version?
Travail.
What's it?
Travail.
Travail, okay. All these things are the beginning of sorrows. In the NIV version here, it says all these things are the beginning of birth pains. It's actually a more literal translation of the original Greek into that aspect. All these things beginning of birth pains. And if you go to our scripture reading this morning, 1 Thessalonians 5, I'm going to read verse 2 and 3. We saw that same language there being used. For you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. Now, Sierra and I have not had children yet, although we hope that God will bless us in the near future with that. What happens with birth pains and contractions? Do they get less or more? Absolutely. And they increase the frequency until the birth event, right? That's the description that's being used here. Yes, there have been earthquakes since the millennium. Yes, there have been these wars and rumors of wars. But when we see the context of the fact that the 20th century was the bloodiest in history, when we see that there are more slaves than ever before, when we see what's happening in terms of persecution, left, right, and center, with humanity's degradation in terms of its moral decline, the intensity is at an unprecedented level. And the Bible says that. But you may be wondering, whoa, okay, Daniel, it's Sabbath, it's sunny. That's pretty heavy. Where's the hope? The hope comes. Let's wrap up the presentation this morning with understanding what that is. Matthew 24, verse 13. Here's the key. It says, "But he who endures to the end, shall be saved." And 24, verse 14. "And the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come." Will there be a people who are faithful in the last days? Absolutely. And Jesus is saying here that the signs of my coming, the wars, the famine, the earthquakes, the absolute moral decline, they're going to increase in intensity and frequency. But at the end of time, there will be a people who speak on behalf of the Lord and give the gospel to the world, and then the end will come. Now sometimes, when you hear this sometimes in sermons, how do we often interpret this? You may say, okay, I'm going to take my map out. I think there's a country in Asia somewhere that hasn't quite heard the gospel yet. If we go to Brazil, maybe, or somewhere in South America, maybe there's something there. Or the Amazon rainforest. Not everyone has heard the gospel yet. Right, let's give some more money to Doug Batchelor, Mark Finley. Go do some more crusades and do some evangelism efforts. We have 2 more countries that haven't heard the gospel yet. And then if they hear it, and if they can hear it by the end of 2019, then the end will come. Jesus will come. Is that how it works? Now, don't get me wrong. There's importance for evangelism. It's important that we go down that road. That's not what I'm getting at. It's a vital part of our gospel sharing. What I'm getting at here, though, is what about our responsibility? You see, there's more to these verses than simply saying, let's go out and make sure that everyone has heard the name of Jesus, and then that will be it. I want you to notice something as we wrap up this morning. Keep your finger in Matthew 24. Keep your finger in Matthew 24. How are we going to give the gospel? Let's go to Revelation. Revelation chapter 14. Revelation chapter 14. Revelation chapter 14. Verses 1 to 5 describes God's people in the last days. But I want you to notice what John the Revelator says about God's last day people. And we're going to start in verse 5. And he says this. "And in their mouth," talking about God's last day people, "was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God." And what is the message that they bear? So remember, in their mouth is found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. And they bear a specific message. That specific message that they bear can be found in verse 6. It says, "Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel." To do what? To preach to whom those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of judgment is to come." Has come. What are they preaching? The gospel? Yes, they're preaching the gospel. What are they saying? The judgment has come. You may say, I thought we were just supposed to preach the gospel. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Yes, but we do that. There's also an accountability to God because there's a judgment that has now come. Verse 7 continues, it says, "And worship him who has made heaven and earth, the seas and springs of water." There's a call back to the Creator. There's a purity of faith and a message directly from God. And in the last days, that is the gospel. That is the gospel. The judgment has come now. Judgment by its term means discernment. Now is the time in our lifetime where we are discerning in the light of God's love who we are against what sin is. Do we choose God or do we choose Satan? That's the work that's going on now, the character development that's going on now. And what happens directly after that? Well, this is the first of the 3 angels' message. At the end of the 3 angels' message, in verse 14, it says, "Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle." And what's that in reference to? The second coming of Jesus. Can you see the parallels here of the types of people of the last day people? And then, as they preach and witness the gospel message, then Christ comes. Do you see how that parallels Matthew 24? I want you to notice one thing. Let's go back to Matthew 24. Matthew chapter 24, verse 13. Matthew 24, verse 13. So there are going to be people who are going to endure to the end. They're going to give a gospel message, right? And these people, the type of people as Revelation talks about, 14, says these are people who have found no deceit in their mouth. These are people who have truly found God as their Savior. Matthew chapter 24, and then Christ comes. Matthew 24, verse 13. Let's just read that again, and 14. "But he who endures to the end shall be saved. and the gospel, the kingdom, will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. And then the end will come. Do you remember the story of the demoniacs? There's a final piece that we didn't address. Turn with me to Mark chapter 5, verse 18. The gospel will be preached as a witness. That's the key word. Gospel as a witness. It brings us back to the account of the healed demoniacs. Remember, when they were healed, the people of the city came out because they healed demoniacs. They went back to the city. They told what they hadn't done at this point. The pig herders had gone back to the city, told them what happened. They came out, they saw Jesus, and they told Jesus to go away. But listen to the actual conclusion of this account. Mark finishes the story in a most glorious way. Mark chapter 5, verse 18. And when he, talking about Jesus, was in the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. The demon-possessed man said, listen, I want to be with you. You've taken this burden away. You have rid me of Satan. I want to be with you. And what is Jesus' response to him? However, Jesus did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you. So Jesus said to him, listen, I know you want to be with you. The great work you can do is to go back to the city. Tell them what I've done. Tell them how much compassion I have. And it says he, talking about Jesus, departed, well actually the healed man, and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done, and all marveled. Can you see the difference? The pig herders who had seen the scene, they'd seen exactly what Jesus had done. They went and told the story of what happened to the city of Decapolis. And the city came out and they told Jesus, they begged him to leave. Now the people who had been, the demoniacs who had been healed themselves, they went back to the city and all marveled. When they told their account of what Jesus had done in their lives, that's when the city took notice. Desire Bezos says this: the men whom he had healed remained, as here's a key word, witnesses to his power. Men marveled as they listened to the wondrous news. When Jesus returned, the people flocked about him, and for 3 days, not merely the inhabitants of one town, but I like this, but thousands from all the surrounding region heard the message of salvation. Here's my point that I'm trying to get across. Who we are as Christians, our own very lives, if we are not following in that same path that God has set out, if we are not truly dedicating ourselves, genuinely desiring to be in his presence, genuinely desiring God at the heart, if we are not the people of Revelation 14 as it says, it doesn't matter how many times we send Doug out, how many times we send Mark Finley out, we will not hasten the coming of the Lord, because there aren't the people yet who can endure to the end in order to be saved. But you may think, well, how am I, just one person, going to have an effect? This is a couple of, we don't know the exact number, the demoniacs here. They went back. They had something that happened to them as individuals. And thousands of people came to Christ as a result of it, as the testimony of what Christ has done in their lives. Imagine if you tell somebody of what Christ has done in your life, how that would affect someone else. But then the question is, and one we don't often talk about, I don't know if I have a lot to talk about what Christ has done in my life. Has anyone felt that way before? I don't know what to tell people. How can I be that witness? The demoniacs were healed. They converted, and they so desired to be with Christ, but they wanted to go with him as he left the city. But they were able to accomplish so much more. You know, remember the quote we read from Stephen Hawking as we wrap up this morning? He said this: there is no new world, no utopia around the corner. That's pretty hopeless. I utterly disagree with that. Brilliant man, he was a brilliant man. We utterly disagree with that. There is a utopia around the corner, and it's called heaven. And heaven isn't just because it's got the beautiful golden gates and there's wonderful things that we're going to have. Heaven is heaven because it is filled with the presence of God. That's why we desire to go back to heaven. You know, the late Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos of Amazon, other people, they want to leave this planet. And they're not just saying we must, it's a kind of a neat idea. They are actively putting money in. Elon Musk has a quote from last year where he said, The only reason he is amassing money and putting money into assets of what he's doing, by the way, he's a multi-billionaire. The only reason he's doing it is so that our species can become multi-planetary. But here's my question. I want to go see Mars, but I want to go see all the other planets and beyond. We should all do that. And one day in heaven, we're going to have an opportunity to do that. But I don't want to go see Mars where I have to be in a bubble and have to live with other human beings in their sinful state still, right? I mean, just imagine, if we go to another planet, we bring all of humanity's woes and difficulties, and we stick it on another planet, what's going to happen? 200 years from now, we need to leave Mars. This is not how God has designed it to be. I want us to look forward to a beautiful, glorious heaven where sin will be no more, and to return to an earth that is made new. And we're going to talk about that in this series in November. But I want to ask a question as we finish up this morning. Is this what you truly desire in your hearts of hearts? We can talk about it on the Sabbath. We can say that we would like to do that. But as in the days of Noah, as it says in 2 Peter, life continues. Life is busy. There are families and kids and things to take care of. We've got work. There's different things. Do I truly desire heaven in a way that will change my perspective in the way that I live my everyday life? And I'm not going to answer it fully today. We're going to answer that question over time in November, over the next few weeks. But I want us to answer that question because it's a critical one for us. Because here's the key. God's purpose in revealing end-time events is not to scare us, right? We spend the first half of the sermon kind of going through it, and when we hear about deep fakes, when we hear about things, it can even be alarming at sometimes. But it's not to scare us. But here's the key. If we try to get right with God because time is short, we don't actually love or know God. If the motivation today is, man, this world is falling apart, I don't want to live in Mars on a capsule with a bunch of other people who are going to be probably mean to me, that's my motivation to actually change, to be righteous, to actually move forward. What is the motivation, in other words? If it's simply because time is short, that is not the right motive. Because if that's a reason, what are we on? We're on a self-preservation trip. And while we may look like we're serving God, we're actually serving ourselves in that instance. You see, God does not want us to focus on the events itself in the level of detail that sometimes we get caught up to. But he wants us to watch and understand what is happening around us because he wants us to use that as a validation of our faith and to draw us closer to the only place of certainty, and that's him and him alone. Listen to what David says, one of my favorite texts in the Bible, Psalm 27, verse 4 and 5. One thing I desire of the Lord. How many things it is? One. One thing. That I may seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord and to inquire in his temple. For in the time of trouble he shall hide me in his pavilion. There's the promise. In the secret place of his tabernacle he shall hide me, and he shall set me high upon a rock. What is David's focus? It's not on the time of trouble, but rather it's on the beauty of God's character. That's the one thing he desires. He says God is going to he promised that he's going to hide me in his pavilion. He's going to protect me. His one sole focus, his one desire is to see the beauty of God. And it is within that context of that focus that David has a sense of confidence, not fear, regarding the end time events and what is to come upon this earth. Now, isn't that a healthy perspective on the time of trouble and all end time events? Each of us needs to answer this question, and it's a question that I've been posing to myself. Do we resonate with David's sentiments here? David's sentiments here towards God. Are we captivated this morning by the beauty of God's character? Yes, the world is crumbling around us, as in the days of Noah, but our highest priority must be to seek out and to be captivated by the beauty of his character, first and foremost. Why? Because Satan is doing everything to show you that God is not the God who he says he is. He's doing everything to alter the picture of God in your hearts. That's the question we have to ask ourselves. All the events that are happening, these things are part and parcel of what's been happening in times. But we can have confidence that we should not be shaken by these things or be scared or be worried about these things because we believe in the Creator God He says that he will come back and save those who will endure. Ellen White writes his words, and I'm going to leave you with these. The shortness of time is frequently urged as an incentive for seeking righteousness and making Christ our friend. Here's the key, she said. This should not be the great motive with us, for it savours of selfishness. It is necessary that the terrors of the day of God should be held before us, that we may be compelled to right action through fear. Is that what should happen, she says? She says, no, it ought not be so. Jesus is attractive. He is full of love, mercy, and compassion. He proposes to be our friend. And that is Signs of the Times, March 17, 1887. I know that I've gone a little bit longer than expected today, but I want you to remember this one thing. We're doing a special series in November, and it's very dear to my heart. When we have changes that occur in our lives, when there are things that don't go quite as they seem they would, we know that there's an active agent. Satan is roaring, what he's doing? He's walking around like what? Roaring lion, seeking who he may devour. Jesus begins with this one thing: do not be deceived, and everything else falls into place after that. If you are deceived, that leads to a host of different difficulties. But let's go through this together. Let's study through November. Let's look at these last day events. And in fact, the Sabbath School lesson next year is actually on Revelation in January. So this is a wonderful precursor. Thank you. May God bless you all.